Hey, I'm Professor Molly, and we're going to discuss the normal pathophysiology of our pancreas and what that organ can do, especially when it comes to the normal regulation of blood glucose in our system. So, normal blood glucose for a typical adult is between 70 to 100, and that is the normal range. So, if I check your blood sugar, I prick your finger, I check an AccuCheck, I am checking the blood sugar ranges in your bloodstream. Now, safely, we have about 1.5 gallons of blood in our bloodstream. We can safely hold about a teaspoon of sugar. That's not a lot. And to safely move the blood glucose out of our bloodstream, we have to have good cell receptors, and our cell has to be able to have insulin to move that glucose into the cell. And that's where it needs to go to safely get it out of our bloodstream. Again, we can only hold about a teaspoon and of sugar and glucose. And if you drink a typical Coca-Cola, that's about 8 teaspoons of sugar. And so your body does not like to hold that amount in its bloodstream. So it wants to move it into the cell. Now, insulin will bind to the cell receptors to move it into the cell. So the cell can then break down the glucose for our energy. And after we use the amount of energy that we need, the rest of it is going to go to our muscles and to our liver, and it's going to be stored for extra use when we're not eating and when we need it to convert. So it's going to basically convert to glycogen. And then if our muscles and our liver then fills up, that's about 2,000-ish calories. If that fills up, then it's going to go back to the liver. It's going to be converted, and it's going to be stored in our adipose tissue for later on. There's a whole long whole cell regulation of how this moves over, but for the most part, that's kind of how blood sugar is maintained and regulated in our body. So our pancreas, if you do not have diabetes, if you have a normal acting pancreas, then you will have what's called a basal bolus secretion of insulin that is occurring throughout the day. And basal rate is the continuous amount of insulin that your body is going to naturally secrete throughout the day. Most people, based on their body weight, it's typically about 40 to 50 units a day. And this is just typically because when you don't eat or you skip a meal, then that to get energy, your muscle and your liver will end up converting back from glycogen to glucose, then move into your bloodstream, and then the insulin that's already circulating there can go get it to make sure that you're not holding more than 70 to 100 70 to 100 deciliters of glucose in your bloodstream. So that's a basal rate that your body is normally going to excrete to maintain that blood sugar. Now, when you eat a meal, then you're going to have what's called a bolus secretion of your pancreas to go get that glucose. So if I drink a Coca-Cola, for example, that has about 8 teaspoons of sugar, like I said, and then my body's going to be like, too much sugar in there. I've got to then now secrete more insulin. So my body's going to, the B cells are going to secrete more insulin, and it's going to be a bolus amount to go get that blood sugar and get it back into the cell and move it in there so it can be safe out of my bloodstream. So that's how the basal bolus rate of insulin works in a normal pancreas. That's going to really play a big factor when you're learning your insulins, because the way the insulins work is to mimic the way your natural pancreas is going to be working. So when I get into talking about insulin, when I say a basal rate, I'm going to be speaking specifically about the intermediate and longer acting, because it acts like our body's basal rate to keep our blood sugar controlled over a longer period of times. And then when I talk about the bolus rate of our insulins, the short acting and the rapid acting, that's acting like our pancreas is like getting the food. So when we're talking about those, we're specifically, that's how our body is reacting to the insulins if we have diabetes and we need insulin to sustain us for life. So we're going to get into diabetes type 1 and type 2, but I just wanted to explain the pancreas, how it works, and really some of the terminology around there. So I hope that makes sense. I'll see you in the next section for type 1 and type 2.